My name is Sophia Langford. I am 28 years old. I work as a school counselor in a small city about 2 hours from the old prairie farmhouse my grandparents left the family in central Iowa. It had always been a quiet place, the kind of spot where the wind moves through tall grass and you can actually hear yourself think. My parents, Margaret and Edward, had suggested we all spend a week there together, just the four of us, plus my cousin Caleb, who lived nearby and could help with some repairs. It was supposed to be simple. No big plans, no pressure, just time away from everyday life. I had been looking forward to it in a cautious way. My older sister Victoria and I had never been especially close, but I kept hoping that maybe on neutral ground, away from our usual routines, things could feel less strained. Victoria had always been the louder one, the one who filled rooms with stories and laughter. I tended to listen more, watch how people moved, notice the small shifts in a conversation before anyone else did. That habit had served me well at work, but it sometimes made family time feel like walking across a floor I already knew had loose boards. We decided to drive out together to save on gas. Victoria picked me up early on a Thursday morning. The car ride started ordinary enough. She talked about her job at the insurance office, how busy things had been, how she was thinking of asking for a raise. I nodded and asked a few questions, keeping things light. About an hour into the drive, we stopped at a little diner off the highway for coffee and something to eat. The place was half empty, just a couple of farmers at the counter and the low hum of an old radio. Victoria went to the restroom and left her phone on the table between us. It was face up. I did not touch it. I was stirring sugar into my coffee when the screen lit up with a notification. Then another. The messages kept coming in quick succession, and because the phone was angled toward me, I could not help seeing the open thread. It was a group chat with our cousin Caleb and one of our aunts on my father's side. The first message from Victoria read, "Sophia is getting really hard to deal with lately. She keeps saying her counseling work is so important, but I think she's just using it as an excuse to skip family stuff." The next one came right after. "Don't believe everything she tells you about how well she's doing. She's always been dramatic when she wants attention. Last time we talked, she sounded completely unstable." My stomach dropped. I read the words twice, making sure I was seeing them right. There was no context that made it a joke. It was deliberate. She was planting the idea that I was unreliable and overly emotional before we even reached the farmhouse. I felt the quiet strength I usually carried start to crack at the edges. My hands stayed still on the table, but inside, everything tilted. Victoria came back and slid into the booth. She glanced at her phone, noticed it was still open, and quickly flipped it over. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she gave a small laugh that did not reach her eyes. "You weren't reading my messages, were you?" she asked, voice light but with an edge underneath. I kept my tone even. The screen was facing me. I saw enough. Her expression shifted fast from fake casual to defensive. "It's nothing, just venting. You know how family chats get. Caleb was asking why you seemed distant last time we all got together." That is not what it sounded like I said. My voice stayed low, but I could feel the first tremor of something larger starting to move through me. "You told them I was unstable, that I make things up about my life." Victoria rolled her eyes and picked up her coffee like the conversation was already over. "God, Sophia, you always take everything so personally. It was just sister talk. You've been so sensitive lately. Mom even mentioned it last week. She said you sounded overwhelmed." The mention of my mother, Margaret, hit harder than I expected. I had not realized she was already part of whatever story Victoria was building. I took a slow breath, trying to stay grounded the way I taught the kids at school to do when things felt too big. It did not work as well when it was my own life. "We are supposed to be spending a week together at the farmhouse," Iz said. "If you already think I am that difficult, why did you agree to come?" Victoria leaned back against the booth. Her voice dropped into the sharper tone she used when she wanted to end a discussion. "Because Mom asked. And because someone has to keep the peace." You are the one who makes everything complicated. Some of us just want a normal trip without walking on eggshells." The words landed like small stones. I did not argue back right away. I paid for my coffee, walked out to the car, and waited. When she joined me, the silence between us felt thick and unsteady. We drove the rest of the way with the radio on low. Every few minutes, Victoria would make a small comment about the weather or the fields we passed, as if nothing had happened. I answered when I had to, but my mind kept circling back to those messages. She had chosen to damage how the rest of the family saw me before the trip even started. It was not an accident. It was a strategy. By the time we turned onto the long gravel road that led to the prairie farmhouse, the sun was starting to lower. The old white house sat among tall grass and a few scattered trees, the porch sagging a little in the middle, the way it always had. My father, Edward, and my mother, Margaret, had arrived earlier with Caleb. They were already unloading groceries from the back of their SUV when we pulled in. Caleb waved from the porch steps. He looked genuinely happy to see us. Margaret came over first and pulled Victoria into a quick hug. Then she turned to me with a smile that felt a fraction too bright. "You two made good time. I was starting to worry the traffic would slow you down." Victoria answered before I could. We stopped for coffee. Sophia got a little quiet afterward. I think the drive tired her out. Margaret's eyes flicked to me, and I saw the concern settle there, the kind that had already been shaped by whatever Victoria had told her earlier. "You do look a little pale, honey. Maybe you should rest before we start dinner." I felt the first real wave of chaotic instability rise in my chest. Nothing had been said outright, yet the story was already forming around me. I was the tired one, the sensitive one, the one who needed handling. I carried my bag inside without answering. The house smelled the same as always, old wood and dust, and the faint trace of whatever soap my grandmother had used years ago. I went upstairs to the room I usually took, set my bag on the bed, and opened the top drawer of the small dresser out of habit, looking for extra blankets. Something white caught my eye at the back of the drawer. It was an envelope, old and creased, the kind that had been folded and unfolded many times. My name was not on it, but when I pulled it out, I recognized my mother's handwriting on the outside. It was addressed to an old friend of hers, the date from almost 10 years ago. I hesitated, then opened it anyway. The letter inside was short. In it, Margaret had written that Victoria needed more of her attention, because Sophia has always been so independent, sometimes too much so. She does not seem to need us the same way. I worry she will drift off and leave Victoria feeling like she has to carry everything alone. I read the lines twice. The paper felt thin between my fingers. Even back then, my mother had framed my quiet nature as a problem, and Victoria's louder presence as something that required protecting. The letter was not cruel. It was worse than that. It was the quiet foundation everything else had been built on. I folded it carefully and put it back exactly where I had found it. My hands were steady, but the feeling inside me was anything but. The text thread, the comment in the car, the letter, the way my mother had looked at me on the porch, it all started to connect in ways that made the air in the room feel thinner. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe the way I told other people to breathe when their worlds tilted. It helped a little, but not enough. Downstairs, I could hear Victoria laughing at something Caleb said. My mother's voice joined in, warm and easy. My father was moving furniture, the sound of wood scraping across the old floorboards. Everything sounded normal from a distance. Up here, with the letter still in the drawer and the messages still burned into my mind, the normal felt like something that belonged to everyone except me. I stayed in the room longer than I needed to. Part of me wanted to go back down and act like nothing had shifted. Another part knew that if I did, I would be agreeing to the version of me they were already writing. The choice sat in front of me, small for now, but already starting to grow heavier. Outside the window, the prairie grass moved in long waves under the evening wind. The house felt both familiar and suddenly unfamiliar at the same time. I told myself I would wait until morning to decide how to handle any of it. One more night of pretending the floorboards were still solid. One more night before I had to figure out what staying quiet was actually costing me. I woke up the next morning with the old letter still sitting in the back of my mind, like a stone I could not quite put down. The prairie farmhouse felt quieter than I remembered, but the quiet did not bring any peace. It only made every small sound sharper. Downstairs, I could hear my mother, Margaret, moving around the kitchen, and my older sister, Victoria, laughing at something my cousin Caleb had said. My father, Edward, was already outside, checking the porch railings. Everything sounded ordinary from a distance, but I knew better now. I got dressed slowly, giving myself time to steady my thoughts, the way I taught the children at school when their mornings started too loud. It did not work as cleanly on myself. By the time I reached the kitchen, Victoria was already pouring coffee and telling a story about a client at her insurance office who had tried to argue over a claim. She glanced at me when I walked in, and the glance lasted half a second longer than it needed to. "Morning," she said, her voice bright in a way that felt practiced. "You look like you barely slept." Rough night. My mother turned from the stove with that same concerned expression she had worn on the porch the evening before. "You do seem tired, Sophia. Maybe you should take it easy today. Caleb and your father can handle most of the heavy work outside." I poured my own coffee and kept my tone even. "I am fine. I came to help, not to be taken care of." Victoria set her mug down with a small clink that somehow carried more weight than it should have. "That is exactly what I mean. You get defensive about the smallest things. It is like you cannot just relax and be part of the group without turning it into something serious." The words landed with the same deliberate edge I had seen in the text thread. Caleb shifted uncomfortably by the sink, clearly sensing the shift in the room, but not wanting to step into it. My mother did not correct Victoria. Instead, she gave a small nod, as if Victoria had simply stated a fact everyone already knew. I felt the first real crack in the careful calm I had been holding. I am not defensive. I am reacting to what is actually being said. Victoria leaned against the counter, arms crossed in that casual way she used when she wanted to look reasonable. "See that right there? You always have to analyze everything. Some of us just want a peaceful week without every conversation turning into a therapy session. You cannot turn off the counselor role even when we are supposed to be family." My mother spoke then, her voice gentle, but carrying the same message. "Victoria is only trying to help Sophia. You have been under a lot of pressure at work. It shows. Maybe this trip is a chance for you to step back, instead of trying to manage everyone." The betrayal sat there in plain sight. My mother was not simply staying neutral. She was actively reinforcing the story Victoria had started in that text thread. I looked at Caleb, hoping for even a small sign that someone else saw what was happening. But he kept his eyes on the floor and stirred his coffee like it required all of his attention. I set my mug down carefully. "I did not come here to manage anyone. I came because you asked us to spend time together. If that has changed, I would rather know now." Victoria gave a short laugh that did not sound amused. There it is again, the dramatic exit line. "You always make it sound like we are attacking you when we are just trying to have a normal conversation." The room felt smaller suddenly. The old wooden floors creaked under my feet as I stepped back from the counter. I could feel the unstable rhythm starting inside me, the way anger and hurt kept trading places too quickly to settle on either one. I wanted to point out the text thread. I wanted to ask my mother why she had written that letter all those years ago, and why she still seemed to believe the version of me she had described in it. Instead, I stayed quiet, because speaking would only give Victoria more material to work with. The rest of the morning moved in the same jagged pattern. My father asked for help carrying some tools from the shed, and Victoria immediately offered to go with him, saying I looked like I needed to rest. When I insisted on helping anyway, she made a comment under her breath about how I never knew when to let other people take the lead. My mother echoed it later, while we were sorting through old boxes in the living room, telling me in a low voice that Victoria was only looking out for me and that I should try not to take everything so personally. By midday, the air inside the house felt charged, like a storm that kept building without breaking. Every small interaction carried an extra layer. Victoria would ask Caleb a question about his job in town, and then add, loud enough for me to hear from the next room, that at least some people in the family knew how to keep things simple and steady. My mother would nod and glance my way with that same worried expression, as if I were the one creating the tension. I tried to focus on the tasks in front of me. I fixed a loose hinge on a cabinet door. I swept the back porch. I answered when someone spoke to me, but the ground underneath everything kept shifting. The story Victoria had started in that text thread was taking root in real time, and my mother was helping it grow. I could see it in the way Caleb avoided meeting my eyes now, in the careful way my father changed the subject whenever Victoria made one of her pointed remarks. Late in the afternoon, my mother announced that the local community center was having a small potluck the next evening for anyone in the area who wanted to come by. It was nothing formal, just neighbors and a few families getting together before the weather turned colder. She said it would be nice for all of us to go, to show we were part of the community, even if we only visited the farmhouse a few times a year. Victoria smiled and said it sounded perfect. It will be good for Sophia to get out and see that not everything has to be so serious. Maybe she can even relax a little instead of analyzing every conversation. I felt the words land exactly where she had aimed them. The potluck was no longer just a casual evening. It was becoming another place where the narrative could spread, where Victoria could make small comments in front of people who did not know me and watch them nod along, because my own mother was already nodding. The thought made the chaotic feeling inside me rise higher. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell them I would stay at the farmhouse. But saying it out loud would only confirm the version of me they were already describing. That evening, after dinner, I went back upstairs while the others stayed in the living room talking. I sat on the edge of the bed again and looked at the drawer where the letter still rested. I did not open it this time. I did not need to. The words were already inside me, mixing with the messages I had seen on Victoria's phone and the comments that had followed me through the day. I told myself I could get through the potluck. I could stay quiet, keep my head down, and leave the next morning if I needed to. But even as I thought it, I knew the choice was already starting to feel heavier than I wanted to admit. Staying quiet meant letting the story continue. Speaking up meant turning the already unstable situation into something that might not be fixable. Downstairs, I could hear Victoria's voice carrying up the stairs, light and easy, telling Caleb a story about work. My mother laughed at something she said. The sound was warm and ordinary, the kind of sound that used to make the farmhouse feel safe. Now it only made the distance between us feel wider. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The wind moved through the grass outside the window, steady and unbothered. Inside, everything felt like it was tilting a little more with every hour that passed. I did not know yet what I would do when we walked into that community center the next evening. I only knew that the ground I had been standing on since we arrived was no longer solid, and pretending it was would not make it any steadier. The next morning, the prairie farmhouse felt even smaller than it had the day before. Breakfast was quiet at first, the kind of quiet that only happens when everyone is pretending nothing is wrong. My older sister, Victoria, sat across from me at the old wooden table, spreading butter on toast, like she had not spent the previous day chipping away at how everyone saw me. My mother, Margaret, poured coffee and kept glancing between us with that careful expression she had perfected years ago. My father, Edward, tried to talk about the porch repairs he and Caleb planned to finish before we left. Caleb nodded along, but kept his eyes mostly on his plate. I ate slowly, telling myself I could get through one more day. The community potluck at the local hall was scheduled for that evening. My mother had already mentioned it twice, each time with the same bright tone that made it sound like a simple, harmless evening out. Victoria took a sip of her coffee and looked at me over the rim of the mug. "You should come tonight, Sophia. It will be good for you to be around normal people for a change. You have been wound so tight since we got here." The jab was soft on the surface, but sharp underneath. My mother did not correct her. She simply added, "Victoria is right. You have seemed on edge. A little time with neighbors might help you relax." I set my fork down. The words I had been holding back since I saw the text thread finally pushed forward. "I saw the messages you sent to Caleb and Aunt Linda before we left for the trip. You told them I was unstable and dramatic. You have been saying the same things here every chance you get. And you," I looked at my mother, "have been agreeing with her." The room went still in that heavy way rooms do when the floor has already started to tilt. Victoria's face shifted from casual to defensive in one quick movement. "You went through my phone. That is exactly what I am talking about. You cannot respect anyone's privacy. You always have to turn everything into a crisis." "I did not go through your phone," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. It was sitting on the table at the diner with the screen facing me. The messages were right there. My mother set the coffee pot down harder than she needed to. "Sophia, that is enough. Victoria was just venting to family. You are making it into something bigger than it is because you are already stressed. This is why we have all been walking on eggshells around you." Caleb stood up from the table without saying anything and carried his plate to the sink. He did not look back. My father stayed in his chair, but kept his eyes on the wood grain in front of him. The betrayal from my mother landed again, heavier this time, because it was happening out loud in front of everyone. Victoria leaned forward, her voice rising just enough to fill the kitchen. "You have always done this. You make yourself the victim so no one can call you out on how difficult you are to be around. Some of us are trying to have a normal family trip, and you are turning it into another one of your therapy sessions." I felt the chaotic swing inside me, anger and hurt trading places too fast to catch either one. I stood up from the table. I am not turning anything into anything. I am naming what is actually happening. You started this before we even arrived. You have kept it going every single day we have been here. And she, I pointed at my mother without raising my voice, has helped you do it. My mother's face flushed. "That is not fair. I am trying to keep the peace. You are the one who cannot let anything go." I did not answer. I walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs. Behind me, I heard Victoria say something low to my mother, and my mother's answering murmur. The words were not clear, but the tone was. They were already rewriting the moment into another example of how difficult I was. The rest of the day passed in jagged pieces. My father and Caleb worked outside. I stayed in my room, mostly packing my bags slowly, even though we were not supposed to leave until the next morning. Victoria and my mother moved through the house, talking in low voices that stopped whenever I came near. The old floors creaked under every step, and every sound felt louder than it should have been. By late afternoon, my mother came upstairs and knocked on the open door. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, not quite looking at me. "We are still going to the potluck tonight. It would mean a lot if you came. The neighbors have been asking about you." I zipped my bag and set it by the door. "I will go, but I am not staying quiet if she starts again." My mother sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment I had heard too many times. "Just try not to make a scene. For once." The community hall was a low brick building at the edge of town, the kind of place that hosted potlucks and town meetings and the occasional high school reunion. When we walked in, the smell of baked chicken and green bean casserole filled the warm room. A few neighbors waved. Mrs. Ellison from the farm down the road came over and gave my mother a hug, then turned to me with a kind smile. "It is good to see you again, Sophia. Your mother tells me you have been working so hard at that school. You must be exhausted." Before I could answer, Victoria stepped in beside me. "She has been. We have all been worried about how much stress she is under. She tends to take everything very personally these days." Mrs. Ellison's smile stayed in place, but her eyes flicked between us with the quick assessment of someone who had lived in a small community long enough to read between lines. My mother nodded along as if Victoria had simply stated a fact. The pattern was already playing out in public now. I felt the unstable rhythm rise again. I tried to move away from them to find a quieter corner near the dessert table, but Victoria followed a few minutes later with a plate in her hand. She spoke just loud enough for the people nearby to hear. You know, Sophia has been telling everyone at home how overwhelmed she is, but I keep telling her she needs to set better boundaries at work. She never listens. Some people just like the drama too much to let it go. A couple standing near the coffee urn glanced over. One of them gave me a sympathetic look that made my skin feel too tight. I turned to Victoria, keeping my voice low but clear. You need to stop. She raised her eyebrows in fake surprise. Stop what? I am just making conversation. You are the one who looks upset. My mother appeared at Victoria's side, her hand resting lightly on her arm. Sophia, please. Not here. You are embarrassing yourself. The words hit harder than anything Victoria had said. My mother was not simply failing to defend me. She was actively helping rewrite the moment in front of strangers. The chaotic feeling inside me crested. I looked at both of them, then at the small crowd that had gone quieter around us. I saw the messages I said loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. I saw the letter you wrote years ago about how I was too independent and Victoria needed more attention. You have both been building this story about me for a long time. I am done pretending it is not happening. Victoria's face went red. You are making things up again. This is exactly why we cannot have a normal conversation with you. My mother stepped closer, her voice tight. Sophia, you are ruining the evening for everyone. If you cannot calm down, maybe you should go back to the house. That was the moment the choice became clear and unavoidable. I could stay and keep trying to defend myself while they continued to chip away at how everyone saw me, or I could stop participating in a dynamic that required me to accept their version of reality as the price of staying connected. I looked at my mother, then at my older sister. I am going back to the house, and I am leaving tonight. I will not keep showing up for trips where I have to defend my own mind just to be in the same room with you. Victoria opened her mouth, but I did not wait for whatever she was about to say. I walked out of the hall into the cool evening air. My father caught up with me at the car, his face tired and uncertain. He did not try to stop me. He only said, "Drive safe," in a voice that sounded like he already knew this was the last time we would all be in the same place for a while. I drove back to the farmhouse, packed the rest of my things, and left a note on the kitchen table saying I had gone home. The drive back to my small city felt longer than the drive out had been. Every mile put more distance between me and the version of myself they had been writing over the past few days. 2 days later, while I was unpacking at home, a message came through from my great-aunt Clara, my father's aunt, who lived 2 states away and only joined family calls on holidays. She had heard what happened at the potluck from Caleb. Her message was short and direct. I am sorry they did that to you again. Your sister has pulled this with other people in the family before. Your mother always backed her because it was easier than dealing with the real problems. You made the right choice by walking away. Some patterns do not change, no matter how many times you show up hoping they will. The message sat on my phone screen for a long time. The clarity it brought was sharp and clean, but it did not take away the loss. I would not be going back to the prairie farmhouse for the casual trips my family had once taken for granted. Those easy weekends of helping with repairs and eating at the old table were gone. The get-togethers that had felt like a thread holding us together had been cut, and I was the one who had done the cutting. In the weeks that followed, I kept my days simple. I went to work, talked with my friend Jessica about ordinary things, and stopped checking the family group chat that had gone mostly silent anyway. My older sister sent one text asking if I was still being dramatic. I did not answer. My mother called once and left a voicemail that sounded more like guilt than an apology. I deleted it without calling back. The quiet that settled around me was not the peaceful kind at first. It carried the weight of what I had lost, but underneath the weight, there was something steadier. I had chosen not to keep sacrificing my sense of reality just to stay in a room where people were actively rewriting it. That choice had cost me the easy version of family I had once tried to protect. It had also given me back the ability to trust my own eyes and ears without having to argue for them. I still think about the prairie farmhouse sometimes. especially on quiet evenings when the wind moves through the trees outside my window. I think about the letter in the drawer and the text thread on the diner table and the way my mother's voice sounded when she told me I was embarrassing myself in front of strangers. The memories do not hurt the same way anymore. They simply sit there as evidence of a line I finally stopped letting other people cross. Choosing myself did not bring the kind of clean victory that makes everything feel better right away. It brought a quieter freedom, the kind that comes with knowing I no longer have to shrink or explain or absorb stories that were never true, just to keep a seat at a table that was already being pulled out from under me. That has been enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If any part of this felt familiar, type boundaries in the comments.